This is Christ the King Sunday. This is the last Sunday of the Christian year. It is the Sunday that we coronate and elevate as ruler of our lives, the Jesus whose story we have been telling all year long. And next Sunday is the first Sunday of Advent. We start telling the story all over again. But today is Christ the King Sunday. Now, I am well aware that kings and queens and royalty are really not a part of the American experience. We chose to leave that mindset and that form of governance behind with a Declaration of Independence and an ensuing revolution some years ago. Our governance is of the people and by the people and for the people, and yet we Americans, we still tend to flock as spectators with great curiosity and interest and awe every time there's a royal wedding in England, don't we? And someone always says, I thought we fought a war so we didn't have to go to these things, but we watch them on television anyway. Kings and royalty are just not part of the American experience. And I'll be honest with you, I'm personally not really into kings anyway. You rarely find a good king. You rarely find a king you would want to emulate in your life, so I would just as soon not be around kings. It's certainly true of the biblical kings. I mean, when we walk through the biblical story, and you read about Pharaoh, who was the king of Egypt, who enslaved a group of people and made them work at hard labor, and even took it upon himself to kill them if he didn't like the way they followed or did not follow his rules. I don't want to follow a king like that. We've already talked about Nebuchadnezzar and Darius, who demanded loyalty from people, forced people to worship him. And if they didn't, lion's den, fiery furnace. King Herod ordered the slaughter of all the baby boys because he feared a new king would take his place. And even someone like King David, who you would think was a good king, had this idea that all property belonged to him because he was a king. Even the wife of another man, had another man killed so that he could take his wife. And then we've got our more modern kings. They're not much better. Henry VIII beheaded and divorced his way through 6 wives. And according to our American intelligence, there are kings and princes and royalty today in several countries throughout the world that with just a nod of their head toward the right person can order the execution of anybody who disagrees or disappoints or deserts them. But the worst king of all, the worst king of all, the king that makes me shudder the most, is that king in the Burger King commercials. He's just creepy, isn't he? Isn't that a creepy commercial? Yeah, I'm not much for kings. I'm just not. But when I come to Revelation chapter 1 and I read about King Jesus, and I think about Jesus as a king and the way that he is described here, I think to myself, I want to serve this king. Because what John tells us about this king in Revelation 1 is there's a consistency to this king. Did you hear how Jesus was described? Grace to you and peace from Jesus, from the Christ, who was and is to come. Very similar to the words that are written by the writer of the book of Hebrews when he says, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. There's a consistency to Jesus. Jesus can be counted on and trusted. There's no guesswork about the heart of Jesus. Now, when I hear the stories of Nebuchadnezzar and Darius and Herod and Henry VIII, you know what I always wonder? And it's just me. I always wonder if they were alcoholics. I do. You know how unpredictable and active alcoholics' behavior can be? Impulsive, illogical, make bricks out of straw, kill all the baby's boys, off with her head. These are symptoms of a disease. I think this way because I grew up as a child of alcoholics, and I'm sensitive to this. And one of the lessons you learn living in a house like that is you learn to read a room. You learn to read people. My parents were so unpredictable, I would get home from school or get home from my after-school job, and you immediately read the room. What is the mood? What is the temperament? What can I say and do and be or not say and not do and be out of the way of? Every day of your life, you adjust to that kind of inconsistency. I like having a king and serving a God that is consistent, that is predictable to some extent, that is steady. And yet this king, this Jesus, is not boring. You would think that to be that steady and that predictable and that consistent, there would be some boring sense to it. But Jesus is not static, because in verses 5 and 6 we hear that there is a growth and an evolution to this king. That while Jesus is very consistent, Jesus is also a king that grows and evolves. So John writes, Jesus is the faithful witness, the firstborn of the resurrection, and the ruler of the kings of the earth. Faithful witness, firstborn of the resurrection, ruler of the kings of the earth. The interesting thing about those three terms, or those three titles, is these are all new titles for Jesus. You don't read these titles anywhere else in biblical Scripture. These are new titles, new understandings of Jesus. As the world changed in the first century, as the challenges of the world changed, as the lives and the struggles of Christians changed, as first century Christians struggled with oppression and violence, they needed images of Jesus that worked for their life. Faithful martyr. Witness in Greek means martyr. The faithful witness, the faithful martyr, because they were being martyred. Hope of resurrection, the firstborn of resurrection, because they needed the hope of resurrection. Ruler of the kings of the earth, because they were being oppressed by the kings of the earth. They needed a king greater than the kings that were oppressing them. I know in my own life I need a Jesus that grows and evolves. I need a God, a king, a Lord that lives in my world and understands my world and engages the specific challenges of my world. I mean, have you thought about how much the world has changed? How much our context and our culture has changed just in our lifetimes? In communication, we've gone from the Pony Express, I know that's probably not in most of your lifetimes. We've gone from the Pony Express to mail. I do remember this one, air mail. Do you remember when you could send things air mail and it would get there in 3 days? All the way to dial-up internet, to now real internet and Instagram communicating instantly. How much change there's been in weaponry and war. God used to just have to manage people who had sticks and rocks. Now we've got smart bombs and nuclear bombs and cyber warfare. Medically, we used to rub ointments and oils on people or mix up soup and then pray for God to do the rest. Today, laser surgeries and organ transplants. Here's my weekly confession. I attempted to use the copy machine this week. Jenna Manning, our church operations coordinator's office, is right next to mine. I told her what I was about to do. She looked at me with trepidation and hope. As I was walking down the hall, she yelled at me, "The code is on the machine, just follow the directions." And I swear I followed the directions. I punched paper size, and I punched black and white. I punched every button I was supposed to punch, and then I hit a button to copy, and the whole machine turned off. And I had to go get Jenna. I don't need a God like me. Yeah, I need a God like Jenna. Is that what you're thinking? Yeah. I don't need a God like, I need a God that is the same yesterday, today, and forever, but a God that still keeps up, that can touch the hard and the messy, complex twists and turns and facets of my life and my world and make a difference, make it work. And finally, John tells me in this text that this king values all of his subjects. Like Becky said a moment ago in the children's sermon, this king values all of his subjects. We read in verse 6, "For it is Jesus who loved us and freed us from our sins by his blood and made us all to be a kingdom of priests." Did you hear that? Made us all to be a kingdom of priests. Priests, by definition, are those who can mediate and represent the presence and work of God. A priest is one who can mediate and represent the presence and work of God. Every human is a priest. Think about that for a minute. Every human being has the capacity and the power to mediate and be the presence of God to us. Every person I meet has been ordained by Jesus as a priest to be able to mediate the presence of God to me. Now, I had this on my mind yesterday. I was honored to be officiating the wedding ceremony of Jenny Bright and Craig Hewitt yesterday in Asheville, and I thought to myself early in the day, the wedding wasn't until 5:30, that I was going to open myself that day to every person I met and let them be priests to me. That's a very interesting exercise if you've never done it. So I made my way to Starbucks that morning for my morning coffee and banana nut loaf, and as I was going in, there was what looked like a homeless person standing outside. He said, "Hey, do you have a cigarette?" And so I reached into my pocket and I handed him one. No, I didn't. I was just seeing if you were still with me. You still with me? I said, "No, I don't, but yeah, here's $5. I don't know what they cost, but I handed him $5. And he said to me, 'God bless you.'" And having already prayed that morning that everybody would be a priest to me, I just received that. He has the power and the capacity to mediate the blessing of God to me. My ordination and my seminary education does not grant me some magic power to be able to bless everyone else. He had just as much right to bless my day as anyone else in the world. He was my priest, and I received that. I went back to the hotel and sat in the lobby before time to be at the wedding. The desk clerk was decorating the Christmas tree in the lobby with great precision, I might add. And as I typed and kind of watched, I finally said with a little chuckle, got a little ornament OCD there, I guess, because she was being very precise. And with a great smile, she turned around and she said, "Well, the hotel is family owned, and my mom always decorated the tree, but she's not with us any longer, and I try to get it exactly the way she did it every year." She was priest to me and reminded me how important it is to do life the way Jesus did life, simply because I love Jesus. In the moments before the wedding, everyone was spewing questions of protocol. You've been to weddings, you know how it is. Now remind me, when do we walk out? What song is being played? Where do I sit? Where do I stand? Questions abound. Except for this one little 3-year-old girl who came up to me and said, "Mr. Jim, I like this church." I said, "Yeah, me too. My shoes are gold glitter. Did you see them?" I said, "Yeah, those are really nice. I wish I had some of those." And then she said, and I quote, "I think God is gold glitter." And she was priest to me. Because in the middle of all the dogma and the ritual that we have created around what we call worship, it's really all about imagining the glory of God anyway, isn't it? And God is gold glitter. I'm not much into kings, but a king who is consistent and a king who chooses to grow and evolve with me in my world, a king that values all of us, that's my kind of king.